Hello and welcome to The Download from Wise Woman and Wordsmith, where insight meets inspiration. A space for creatives, dreamers and visionaries ready to spark new ideas, ignite purpose and reimagine possibilities. Here we share downloads of wisdom, stories and strategies to help you thrive in your creative journey. I'm your host, Jill Marshall. Tune in, connect and let the magic unfold.
Show you tomorrow.
Recently, in my fiction editing mentorship, we've been talking a lot about chapters and pacing, especially the way they get shorter and faster paced towards the end of the book. A quickening, if you like. I've been noticing this quickening around me a good deal of late, so that's what I want to explore today. The quickening, how it shows up in stories, how Carl Jung and his close collaborator Marie-Louise von Franz understood it in the psyche, and how it turns up in the very real rhythms of our own lives. So, back to my mentees. These fiction editors are at the very end of the programme now, on their final exercise, their first full developmental edit of an entire novel. They've had to gather everything that they've learned so far over a 6-month intensive process and put it into practice. They've had to find a client, take on an appropriate manuscript, edit the book in all aspects to make it the best book possible while remaining in that author's own voice, annotate all the changes and suggestions, write the report, and submit a full professional edit as if they were already in business. I'll be reading both the book and their assessment, and then we'll go back and forth before they return it to their client. It's all on them, end to end, on their own. And suddenly, it feels as though everything has sped up. For them, all the slow build of months of learning has led to this moment. Their businesses are about to launch or relaunch. The pace has shifted. The quickening is upon them. And those books they've been editing, well, every story has its similar rhythm. Longer, slower, exploratory chapters in the middle, and then suddenly the pages begin to fly. When you're reading a novel, the early and middle chapters often develop at a gentler, though still lively enough, pace. They give you space. A chapter might cover days or weeks. It might dip into description. It might linger in conversation. The rhythm is steadier somehow, sometimes even slower, as the characters consider what's happened and contemplate their journey. But as you move closer to the climax, the chapters begin to shorten. Suddenly more happens in a handful of pages than in whole sections before. Threads that once felt scattered and separate begin to converge, and the pace quickens. The reader leans forward. Something is about to happen, and that something is the climax and the transformation of the characters. That's exactly what my mentees are experiencing right now. For months, they've been working on fragments, on shorter exercises, on shorter books, learning how to tackle characterization, voice, plotting and pacing, dialogue, copy editing, technical aspects of fiction like showing not telling, and all the rest. The chapters of their learning have been wider, slower, piece by piece. But now, everything is converging in one final assessment. A whole book, a real client, a professional edit. The density of their learning has increased. They're living the quickening of their own journey as editors. And the more I think about it, the more I see that this isn't just a literary technique, it's an archetypal pattern. Life, too, seems to follow this rhythm. There are times in life that feel like those longer middle chapters. The waiting stretches on. We feel suspended, sometimes for months or even years. Doors stay closed. Nothing seems to shift, no matter how much we push. That waiting can feel unbearable. But it isn't meaningless. It's gestation, if you like. The stillness before momentum. In Jungian terms, this is the liminal period, the space between the old and the not yet, where the psyche is ripening, even if the surface looks static. Marie-Louise von Franz, Jung's closest disciple and most brilliant interpreter of myth and the unconscious, spoke often of how the psyche gathers itself in these still periods, biding its time until it is ready to move. You see the same pattern in alchemy and even in baking. The alchemists spoke of the quickening as the moment when the dull base matter, often lead, began to stir with spirit, when the prima materia showed signs of life. And in baking, it's when the dough suddenly rises after long stillness, the yeast alive and multiplying, the whole mixture swelling with energy. What looked inert reveals itself as alive, and from that quickening, the true transformation begins. And then suddenly, the rhythm changes. What has been waiting erupts into being. Events seem to cluster together, synchronicities tumble one on top of the other. Encounters and choices that might once have been scattered across months arrive in the same week, sometimes the same day. The density of experience increases, and life feels somehow as though it has contracted, speeding us forward towards some unseen threshold. That, dear listener, is the quickening. It's both exhilarating and very destabilizing, because at the very moment when the pace accelerates, another archetypal force often shows up. Carl Jung called it enantiodromia, the tendency of things to flip into their opposite once they've reached an extreme. What this looks like in practice is that just as we're moving towards integration, just as the climax nears, if you like, the psyche throws us the shadow of what we're striving for. Von Franz explained how the unconscious compensates, bringing up exactly what we need to face if we're to become whole. So in this quickening, when life accelerates, it also presents us with our opposites. The tests get sharper. Now, in story terms, this will be very familiar to you. The climax of a novel or a film almost always throws the hero against their shadow. The protagonist who longs for freedom is confronted with the temptation of security. The one seeking love is tested with betrayal or loss. The one pursuing life must look death in the eye. The quickening brings speed and the opposite force within that speed, and together they create the gritty threshold of transformation. Just this past week, I found myself inside such a quickening. Now, for years, as you'll know, I've been doing the deep work of letting go, of claiming and building a life that is truly mine. I've had some interesting plot pivots in my life that have created quite an interesting time, but some periods of that life have definitely felt like the long, slower middle chapters. Steady work, lots of waiting, and doors not quite opening. But then suddenly this week, everything began to cluster. After a sort of cleansing meditation in which I deliberately let go of old versions of my working life, I felt totally sure that I would not return to a traditional job again. But no sooner had I got back to my computer after this, the perfect job appeared on LinkedIn. I mean, so stupidly perfect that I feel there can't be many of us qualified to do it. It seemed like an opportunity that was almost designed for me. And yet, it came dressed in the garments of the old world, tempting me with security, with salary, with structures I've worked so hard to free myself from. And did I apply? Well, of course I did. It was like a reflex, a muscle twitching to be used. And in more or less the same few hours, not one, but several people from old versions of my life, sometimes very old versions, popped suddenly out of the woodwork. And just as I was contemplating all this, my body acted out the tipping point. In a bizarre, kind of comic moment, I overstretched at the desk and was literally catapulted from my chair, crashing to the floor, jolting as though life itself was saying, "This old balance is gone." And at that exact moment, my flatmate walked in. I wasn't quite lying on the floor, but almost, with news of her own, as though to underscore that everything was shifting around us. It wasn't just one thing, it was everything, a clustering. The acceleration, the unmistakable sense that time had contracted and the tempo had shifted. And within it, I could see that enantiodromia at work. Just as I leaned further into freedom, the lure of security reappeared. Just as I moved towards a new life, figures from the past arrived like ghosts. And just as my decision processes seemed formed and final, that trickster tipped me off my seat, as if to say, "You sure about that?" And luckily, I was able to not get caught up in it and not knock myself out on the doorframe and say, "Actually, yes, I'm sure." But this is exactly what Jung meant the psyche compensates. As one principle gains strength, its opposite appears, not to derail us, but to test us, to sharpen the transformation. Von Franz explained how the unconscious seems to accelerate its material at these times, as if in a rush to bring things to the surface before the new integration takes hold. It feels, believe me, chaotic, but it's deeply patterned. It's the final chapters of a novel playing out in life, short, sharp, dense, converging, with the hero forced to meet their greatest contradiction just before they can cross the threshold. And so, what do we do in these moments? Rather like I did, we remember the rhythm. We remember that the long waiting was part of it, the gestation that made the quickening possible. We recognise the acceleration for what it is, the sign that transformation is near. And then when the opposites arrive, when security tempts us just as we choose freedom, when old entanglements hover just as we're open to new love, when old obligations flare just as independence emerges, we don't see these as regressions. We see them as the necessary test that completes the quickening. It's not failure. It's not chaos. It is the archetypal rhythm of change. And so, if you find yourself in that place where nothing has moved to what feels like forever, and then suddenly everything happens at once, where you are buffeted by synchronicities and resurfacing patterns, and the pace accelerates, and the tests get even sharper than they already were, including, apparently, trying to crack your skull open, well, take heart. You are just in the quickening. You are living through the same archetypal structure that shapes stories, myths, and transformations across time. It means the waiting you've been doing was not wasted. The acceleration isn't punishment, and the opposites are not regression. Together, they are the threshold. It's just like that in novels. When the chapters quicken, the climax is near, and the transformation is at hand. And as I watch my wonderfully talented, thoughtful, and committed fiction editors step into their own quickening, I see the resonance. They've waited, they've studied, they've practiced on fragments and shorter edits like those long middle chapters in a book. And now suddenly, everything has converged. They're doing it for real. They're stepping into the accelerated rhythm that signals transformation, not just as editors, but as professionals about to launch their own work into the world. It's that same rhythm we see in novels, in Jungian psychology, in spirituality, and in life. Long waiting, sudden acceleration, the quickening and the test of opposites that comes with it. For them, it's the start of their editorial businesses. And for me, it's the acceleration of synchronicities, choices, and shocks that tell me I'm at a threshold. For all of us, it's the same pattern, story and psyche moving in rhythm together. Just like dough that rises after stillness, or mercury that begins to stir in the alchemist's vessel, the quickening in our lives is the sign that what once seemed inert is alive and moving, and that transformation is already underway. And so to them, and to you, if you're listening and feeling the tempo of your own life accelerating, be brave. The quickening is not chaos. It's the sign that the shift you've been working towards is about to arrive. Congratulations. Thanks for tuning in to the Download podcast. Feel free to like, comment, and share and all of that good stuff. Also, I'd love to hear more about your own intuitive hits and downloads. So do find us on Facebook, YouTube, and more.